Now that we have examined how the logic of science works in light of theism, we can distinguish between theism as the main theory and the axiological auxiliary theory. The main theory of theism says that there is an omnipotence power who governs creation and change on the basis of normative goodness. Theism entails that there is a probability of one that God will do the best action, the best kind of action, a very good action, and no bad actions. The main auxiliary theory will inform us about what are the best actions, what are the best kinds of actions, and what are very good actions. So the auxiliary hypothesis will be our hypothesis about value, a value theory. And it is only through the conjunction of the main theory of theism and our auxiliary value theory that we derive predictions. But theism still has its limits in the sense that theism is an in-principle falsifiable hypothesis. There can be data that disconfirms theism regardless of our auxiliary assumptions. Theism's limit will still be in terms of value, but the value meta-principles will be able to encompass all axiological theories such that any axiology that violates these principles will be highly improbable and so cannot help theism. The first value principle is what I call the ultimate goodness principle, ultimate goodness principle. For any state of affairs S can be instantiated by God if S permanently bears the axiological status of being good on the whole at some time, T. This principle leaves open at what time an entity will gain the axiological status of being good on the whole. This puts a constraint on any of God's actions, since we need some way of separating out the state of affairs that are antecedently expected on theism from those that are not, or else theism will not be predictive at all. The ultimate goodness principle will be a meta-principle, one that applies to any auxiliary hypotheses we conjoin to theism. So it works as a falsification principle. Thus, we have an in-principle way of falsifying theism directly without any way for the theists to update their axiology. I will discuss more about axiological updating later, but if there is some evidence that violates this principle, then theism itself has been falsified, not just the auxiliary theory. This brings me to my second meta-principle, which I call the axiological relevance thesis. This principle is not a falsification principle, but rather a confirmation principle. This was developed originally by Tim Howard of Invoking Theism. It goes like this: axiological relevance thesis. For any observation, theism predicts the observation if a relation of axiological relevance connects propositions about theism to propositions about the observation. This principle will be able to encompass all axiological theories, such that any axiology that follows it will be able to be used to help theism make predictions. Now, of course, we can form an antithesis. The axiological irrelevance thesis. For any observation, theism predicts against observation if a relation of axiological irrelevance connects propositions about theism to propositions about observation. The ultimate goodness principle works as an undercutting defeater, and the axiological irrelevance thesis works as a rebutting defeater against theism directly. The reason for this is that in the case of the axiological irrelevance thesis, that is the antithesis of the axiological relevance thesis, thus, if axiological relevance serves as positive confirmatory evidence for theism, then axiological irrelevance serves as negative disconfirmatory evidence against theism. And so satisfying the axiological relevance thesis would increase the probability of theism, and thus satisfying the axiological irrelevance thesis would decrease the probability of theism conditional on the evidence. The ultimate goodness principle is a constraint on God's goodness in the sense that any axiology that is to help theism must conform to it. The reason that a violation of the ultimate goodness principle is an undercutting defeater is because a violation of it does not necessarily show theism to be false, but rather it would undermine God's goodness, or would make any axiology have a low intrinsic probability.